Hi there, this is Dave Scott, and this is Beyond Humanity, where tonight we are going to take you to one of the most popular UFO families known right now. We have heard the story of Chris Bledsoe. Now, for the first time, Ryan Bledsoe, his son, is going to talk about what it's like to be a part of the Bledsoe family, what it's like to have UFO and alien experiences, the lady, and every alphabet agency wanting to know more about why this phenomena is happening to the Bledsoe family. When it comes to ETs and UFOs, there's always a story. Some are more publicized than others. Take the Bledsoe family. Patriarch Chris Bledsoe is well known in the UFO community for having one of the most extraordinary cases of contact, from aliens to the lady. But for the first time, there are others in that family who've also experienced the supernatural and unknown. Meet Ryan Bledsoe. Ryan has been there and seen firsthand not only what his dad has been through, but now he's ready to tell his own story for the first time. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on UAPresearch.com. We really do appreciate you.
I appreciate that. I've definitely never told much about this before. I kind of talked a little bit about it on the internet, but when Joel reached out to me, I just figured he's such a good friend of mine. I thought it would be awesome. So I'm looking forward to it.
Ryan, everybody knows the fame that your dad has kind of been very public over the last number of years about his own story. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because really this is about you. But his story is very intertwined with what you are going through on a daily and weekly and monthly basis as well. You know, when you look back as a kid at your entire family from the time you were growing up to where you are as a young man these days, did you ever think that your name and your family name would be synonymous with extraterrestrials and UFOs?
Definitely not. We grew up really old fashioned, old timey, religious, so to speak. So when I was a kid, you didn't really talk about that kind of thing. You didn't think about it. You don't talk about ghosts. So I never in a million years would have ever expected something like that. It still to this day, it shocks me sometimes, but it's just a part of our world now. So it's
Ryan, how do you feel
interesting.
about that though? You know, because that is not a quote end quote normal way to grow up with this type of contact. I understand you come from a very religious family and you're very
Right.
God fearing, and to this day, you know, the family still has a beautiful relationship with your beliefs, and I think that's wonderful and I think that's commendable. But for a lot of people out there, you have been ostracized by many in your community for having these contacts and trying to intermingle religion in between them.
Yeah, it's definitely something that kind of is a double-edged sword because it happened when I was 13 years old. It's been more than half my life, so it's definitely really cool. But at the same time, it's like at Christmas we don't talk about it. It's not something we acknowledge. We're not really allowed to talk about it still to this day. So I love it. I mean, I'm my dad's biggest supporter, big fan. But at the same time, it kind of hurts that the only place we can talk about this is with wonderful people like yourselves. I can't talk about my cousins or talk about it with my cousins, my aunts and uncles. It's kind of hard to compartmentalize this double side of my life with people I know on a day-to-day basis. It's very difficult to have them coexist in an easy way. Very difficult.
Ryan, that brings up an amazing question that I have for you. And that is, why are you not allowed to talk about it as a family? I mean, you guys seem like the ultimate UFO family. And I mean that with all due compliments and no disrespect or funny nature whatsoever. But I mean, is there just a self-imposed embargo on the family discussing this, or is it because there are members of the family that just cannot handle having this conversation?
Well, for starters, I want to say if my family's listening, I love you. But I asked my uncle one time when I was a little boy after it all happened, and I said, do you believe Dad? I believe my dad. And he said, well, if aliens were real, Jesus would have died on their planet too. So it's just something that it's a belief where this can't be real because it's not in the Bible. So don't talk about it. Don't bring it up. I don't want to hear it. So it's kind of how I've grown up, to where I have this double life where, we'll go to bar mitzvahs with the CIA people, and then we'll go have a normal Christmas with my wonderful grandma, and we don't talk about it. It's a double life kind of thing. We're not supposed to bring it up because of the implications of it being against, Sunday conversation.
So with that family embargo that you guys have right now, I don't think this is something that anybody has ever talked to you or your father about publicly. That has to be difficult for you guys, because here you are, a good God-fearing family, and you're basically being told you're lying, or you're basically being told there is something demonic that is happening with you and Mr. Bledsoe's entire family. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, that there's people in your family and your church that you're supposed to trust and supposed to be able to say anything to, and you guys don't have that support system.
Well, I had kind of sent this into you. I'm glad we're kind of going this way, but this was very traumatic for me as a child. The only way that people really know me is either through Dad, or I do have a little Twitter, and I like to talk with people of a like mind. But this is something that's never really been discussed. But this happened when I was a child, a young child, and it was very scary. It was very mind altering, and I just remember being a 13-year-old boy, wondering why Mommy and Daddy are fighting about UFOs, and why Mom is calling a preacher to the house to pray the demons away because Satan is around. It was that kind of thing. It was terror. It was believed. It's not evil, but it was believed to be evil, and that's terrifying as a child to go through. That's something that Dad wouldn't really have the experience to mention, because he was, in his 40s. It's a different ballgame, but we were kids. We were young children, and it was very scary at the time.
Ryan, you have seen, since you were 13 years old, every emotion in your family coming through this entire phenomena. You never asked for this. You guys never prayed for this. You never asked God for this. Do you feel the way that the emotions of the tears, the anger, the distraught, everything that you guys have gone through, have you tried to figure out what this purpose is? And religiously speaking, have you received any answers?
That's a really good question. I have wondered more than half of my life why this would happen to us, why it would happen to anyone. And, that's a really good question. I kind of have to think about it, if that's okay.
No, please take your time, because I think this is something, Ryan, where, I've seen you on Twitter. We've never interacted previous to this, but I have interviewed your dad. I have met your mom and dad in San Francisco at UFO Con 2020, and they are two of the nicest people that I have had the pleasure of meeting in this field. And I can honestly look at you guys and say, I was very skeptical as an experiencer myself. I was very skeptical by a lot of things that happen. But you know what? You get a really good impression on honest people when you are around them. And the one thing that I learned from the number of hours I spent with your dad and mom just talking, whether it was over breakfast or whether they were sitting in on my speech or whether I was sitting in on theirs, or we shared dinner a couple of nights together, is they are very, very genuine, good-hearted people. I don't think that they would endanger their family on any type of purpose regarding this. And I mean, that has had to lead to hundreds of sleepless nights for all of you over the last 10, 15 years.
I really appreciate the kind words. That's very nice. I will say that you're correct. There were a lot of sleepless nights. There were also not only a lot of sleepless nights, there were a lot of nights where our sleep was cut short because it would be 4 a.m. And you have to take a step back and think, this happened to my dad, and the only people that believed him was his son, Chris Jr., who was there, his 13-year-old son, me, his 14-year-old son, my brother, and his daughter, who was 9. That's it. Nobody else believed him. He was so frantic to prove that it happened that there were many mornings he would say, get up, 5 a.m. before dawn, I see something in the sky. And we would rush to the door, go to see. Hundreds or thousands of times where it's like, everybody, they're out here right now. And it was a very frantic, a lot of sleepless nights, lots of nights of our sleep being interrupted for that reason. Also, lots of nights of dad screaming in his sleep from terror, nightmares, which later came out in the regression. It was not an easy time to be a child. It was very scary. And to go back to the previous question, if that's okay, you asked me if I have pondered why I think this may have happened. My father, although he never prayed to see, a spinning light in the sky, he prayed for God. He said, if, somebody out there, help me. He was dying of an illness. He was selling his company, stressed, and he was healed. He was healed of Crohn's disease that night. That's an indisputable fact. He's been in remission of Crohn's disease for 14 years now. I think that it has happened for a divine purpose. Do I think that it's a divine purpose that has to affect the whole world like people hype up on the internet? No, I don't think that. But I think just the fact alone that my father was healed, and in a way it brought our family together, although it was very scary at first, to me, that is a divine purpose. It brought us together in a time where we felt like there was no hope, losing the business, moving across town, downsizing homes and everything. And I think it helped my family heal in a lot of ways that the world could never understand, because it brought us closer to where my friends don't understand why I'm so close with my family, and they just don't get it. We're unbreakable because of this, because it's us versus the world. No one can really see that from the outside if they haven't met us. I don't know. I think it was divine.
Ryan, I want to ask you one more question before we move on to your experiences and really start concentrating on you. At 13 years old, that is a tough time to be a teenager, to be a young man. Puberty's hitting, acne, bad hair. Girls start looking attractive for the first time. It's a difficult time. But where it's also a difficult time is when this story spreads around your town, there's a lot of bullying. And there's a lot of bullying in this field, in ufology, even today, where adults act like children because they don't believe your story. They don't want to believe you. They don't want to believe me or others who have had these maddening experiences. For you, what was that bullying like as you were trying to grow up? You're trying to make sense of it. Your family can't make sense of it. And yet now you have to deal with an entire church, an entire community who is literally throwing your name, your family in the mud.
That's a very interesting question. I really like that question. We were not only bullied by the religious world, who we still respect. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. We were very bullied by the religious world. We were not received well by even our own family and friends. And to take it a step further, we were ostracized by the UFO world. It was just, nobody wanted anything to do with us. It took Dad a year to tell his experience. You know the whole story. I know this interview's not so much about that, but MUFON's at our house. Next thing you know, documentary. That was terrible. It was awful. I remember when I was 15, the day after that documentary aired, I had to stand in front of the class, embarrassed out of my mind, and explain it because they heard my last name on the TV. Kids laughing, saying, it's crazy. Through my whole high school career, it was, some people liked it. I had a teacher take me, my art teacher, wonderful woman. We're still friends on Facebook. She pulled me aside after class and said, I can't believe you guys are so brave to tell the story. I saw this thing in the woods many years ago and was too scared to talk about it. So it wasn't all bullying, but there's so many years where, for example, my fiance, she and I got together 10 years after it happened, something like that, 8, 7 years. She was working a job in town. many years after the documentary aired, and this guy walks in to buy some medicine. It's a little pharmacy. I don't know if I said that. And she heard somebody in the background say, "I saw a light in the sky." And the other guy said, "Oh, like them crazy Bledsoes." She texted me right away, like, "Oh my gosh, you weren't making it up. People really say this stuff around town." All these years later, went to the movie theater, watch a movie many years after it happened as well. And this guy bumps into me. He said, "Hey, I heard your dad was on shrooms. Is that true?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? My dad's never done shrooms in his life." People just say crazy stuff all around the town. We were a laughing stock. We were crazy. My dad, he lost connections with half of his family. They didn't want anything to do with him because it was too crazy. It was evil. It was bizarre. We've lost a lot of people over this story. It's not all bad, but just to stick to the theme of the question, it was us versus the world is what it felt like, if that makes sense.
Outside of the family, are you lonely?
I have a very small group of friends who get it and have seen things with me and support me and I can talk about it with. But I would say that there's very few people where face to face I can really talk about this and feel like I'm heard and accepted. Does that make sense?
All you really want to do is be human.
Yeah, I'm a normal guy. That's it.
I can feel the emotion in you with talking about this, because obviously, and I apologize if I've touched a nerve with you here, Ryan, but I can hear the emotion in your voice as you talk about this. Is hard for you to discuss.
It is. I have not done an interview for a good reason. Joel, who is a very good friend of mine, I have nothing but respect for him, asked me, and I said, for you, I'll do it. I've never spoken publicly about this. It's very hard for me to do the Twitter thing, but I very probably poorly thought that one through, thought that it would help me talk with like-minded people and maybe it would be therapeutic. There's a lot of people who say I'm doing it for fame or whatever. I don't care about that. If I was, I'd be on it every day. Oh my gosh, I've got this going on. I thought it would help me to talk to like-minded people, and I've come to find that it is very hard to find like-minded people who really hear you. They hear what you're saying. They understand what you're feeling. There's not a lot of people, and I would love to hear more about your experiences as well, but there's not a lot of people who could truly empathize with someone who has experienced the unexperienceable or the inexperienceable. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense to me, because as someone who has also been face to face with extraterrestrials like
Right.
you have, people don't understand how much that changes you. People don't understand the horrors that run through your mind. And when I use the word horrors, it's not like in a horror movie sense, but
Right.
everything in your life up to that moment changes everything. You don't all of a sudden think properly, because that fleeting moment, and a lot of these incidences only happen maybe for a minute or 2 minutes long, but they don't understand how life altering a few seconds or just 1 or 2 minutes can be. And it
Right.
changes your entire perspective. So I understand where you feel all alone and you feel almost ostracized, because you don't want people to say, "That's that wacky guy." You want people to say, "That's a really good man. And yes, he's had some things happen that can't be explained, but I know that man. I know he's not a liar. I know he's not out there to deceit. Let's just treat him like a human being." And for people in your shoes, that's very difficult.
Right. I love my grandfather to death, and I wish he were here today, but I wanted to share this. Again, I was 13, and at the time we were next door neighbors, at the original property. I get off the school bus for school one day, the day after it happened, right? Because it happened, late at the night, and I think I was staying with my grandma, my mother's mother, across town. I get off the school bus to go visit my grandpa, and he says, "Boy, your daddy's been smoking dope, and he saw a green booger man." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Go ask your daddy." We're in the South, so we have little nicknames and stuff. "Go ask your daddy. He's seen green booger man." I said, "What are you talking about?" I run home, and I talk to Dad, and he's frantic, unbelievably frantic. Oh my gosh, I had this experience last night, and he thought it was the end of the world. He was like, had shotguns at every door. It was chaos. It was terror. My brother was he was 17, it ruined his, I guess I should say, psyche for many years. And to this day, it has stuck with me that the way that I found out that my father had this experience was my own grandfather, not only talking about my dad, but his own son, immediately saying he's crazy, he's a liar, he's smoking drugs, he's on dope. And that profoundly impacted me to where from that moment, I believed my father when I looked at his eyes and he was telling me the truth. I've never 1 second of my life had a doubt about that. Yet everyone else in the family, his own sisters, his mother and father, and I don't mean that, if they're listening, they know I'm doing this. I love you guys. But I've never doubted a word that my father said because I know that he wouldn't lie to me about this. Not to mention I've had thousands of sightings with him, so it's kind of too late now. But that really stuck with me, what you were saying about our own family ostracizing us. It's something you don't forget. It makes you guarded. It makes you close.
Very much so. Take us back to when you were 13 years old.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, UFOs and aliens, which aren't a very big household topic, all of a sudden becomes a massive, massive part of your life, effective immediately.
Okay. You just want me to start from the beginning, or is there anything specific you'd like me to?
Let's just roll with it, and I want to know your feelings, what you're going through as a 13-year-old boy.
Okay. Well, it was 14 years ago, so let me go back. Dad was just, I guess, should say, selling the company. It was hard times. My brothers and I and my father and 2 cousins on weekends. I was in, middle school, and on weekends we were building a house. It was a chaotic time. We were downsizing because he sold the company. Everybody knows that story, so I won't go into detail. And it was a time of chaos and just frantic, building a new home, right? And moving across town. Weekends were spent we didn't have a crew. It was just us building this house. And it was a big uprooting time in my life where I lost all my friends that I grew up with from kindergarten all the way to 7th grade, to starting a new school and feeling already lonely. I had no friends. I had to make all new friends. And I did. Over the years, I did. But at the time, I was very lonely, very sad. And then my dad was struggling with his sickness. He was very sick, very, very physically sick, and in turn it caused his stress to ramp up, and it was a cycle where every time his stress got worse, his Crohn's disease almost killed him. So it was like he could have died. We didn't know. It was terrible. And then this stuff happened and he was healed physically, but it was so terrifying because it was all this stuff coming down, losing the business. Dad's gonna die, hopefully not, whatever. He had a near-death experience, and then this stuff starts happening, and now mom and dad are fighting, and it's evil, it's scary, but my dad and my brother are telling me, no, it's the end of the world, they're invading us. All this stuff at once was very hard for me to process, to where I'm trying to process how to say it now. I've never really been asked this question. And I go to school, and it's like, who do I tell? I don't talk about this. I was eventually put in the guidance counselor during this time, to where I never talked about this, but I was just going through so much depression at that age, all the way into high school, where it made me struggle mentally. I would say it might have even stunted my mental development a little bit, kind of like had a wall up. My brother, who is now, I guess he just turned 29 years old, he wouldn't acknowledge this for many, many years. My brother, Chris Jr., who was there the original night, he wouldn't talk about this with me, his own little brother, for a minimum of 5 to 8 years after it happened. We had one conversation the night it happened, then we never talked about it again until a couple years ago. It was very traumatic. It was very terrifying. I was the only one who was saying, Dad, tell me about it. I have to know. I was the curious one. It was probably unironically, or ironically, I should say, why I'm the one on Twitter. I'm the one who always wanted to talk about it with people who were like-minded, with people who would listen, because I felt like I have to know about it. But in many ways, it's hard to process. It's really hard to say into words. Never been asked this. It was terrifying, yet it was enlightening. I had to know more. I had to to see it more. I was always chasing. I want a sighting. Why couldn't it have been me there that night? And I'll get into that later. I've eventually had some pretty crazy sightings, but it felt like no one would listen. It was crazy, you know? It was crazy. Or we were liars, or we were seeking to make money off the documentary, which they never, I don't think they paid us a dime, and it was a terrible experience. It's very hard to process. I'm kind of like spinning gears here.
No, that's fine. Let's go to your own first personal experience.
Sure.
You've heard the family experiences right through this. You have a curious teenage curiosity as this is going on. You want to soak this up as much as a sponge, but your family really isn't discussing this entire matter of what your dad had gone through. But for you, you were itching for something to happen. You wanted to feel, I'm going to assume, much like your dad did, and you wanted to see for yourself what was going on. So take us back to that first experience that you had.
Sure. That's a little bit of an easier question. I would say the first experience that I had, so earlier I had mentioned that he would sometimes get us out of bed and say, oh my gosh, we got to go look right now. There's something there. He was obsessively watching the sky every night, all night. And he still does. I wouldn't say obsessively now, but he still goes out every night and just looks at the sky. It's changed him forever. That's never going to change. And he would look so much that basically we saw so many things in the night sky. And I would say a sighting can vary from seeing something in the sky to seeing something face to face. There's this whole spectrum of sightings. So in that day, when I was 14, 13, 15, I saw hundreds of, lights in the sky that would move or zigzag. They would switch gears, not switch gears, but they would switch directions. They would bob up and down. I saw many things. I knew my father was telling the truth. But the first significant experience that changed me truly how I thought and felt about everything was when I was 18 years old. And this was kind of enlightening for me because, this is 5 years after the original night. Chris Jr. won't talk about it. He's still terrified at this point. My brother Jeremy, he didn't really like dealing with it. At the time, he couldn't handle the ridicule. My younger sister, who funnily enough is a huge magnet for this. I know my dad said that many times. She didn't like to talk about it. She was also terrified. I was the only one at the time who would talk about it with my father. And we've become very close over this. So I'm out in the backyard with him one night. And I said, Dad, I wish all those years ago it was me who was there. I wish I could have seen an alien, a UFO. And he said, well, son, they're not aliens. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, they're not aliens. They're magical. They interact with your thoughts and your mind. And I said, what are you talking about? How can they sit up there above our atmosphere in a spinning disc, zoom in on me with their listening device and hear my thoughts? That makes no sense. He said, that's not what they do. They play with destiny. They know things before they happen. They're spiritual. And I had never really heard him talk like this. This is the year he saw the lady, mind you. And this was 2012 when I was 18, just for a nice frame of reference. And he was telling me these things, and I couldn't comprehend it because on the one hand, I grew up Pentecostal Christian holiness, which if you know what that means, women don't cut their hair, you wear a skirt down your ankles. And I say this with respect. It's just the way I was raised.
My family's Haldeman Mennonites on my mom's side.
There you go. That's
I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's a step further. There you go. So you know what I'm talking about. It's the way I was raised, and I still hold that with respect. I have no ill will towards that, but I was raised that way. So in my mind, there's either aliens, or there's a God, but there's also aliens, or there's just God, but no, there's one or the other, or they can both exist separately. They're not together. That's crazy, even to me at this time. And Dad said, no. I met this lady and she told me these things. And, we talked about it. It was just all night. And she appeared to me as a bull. We're really just kicking it and just chilling. And we're hours in the yard. And he said, and they do funny things and they mess with you, son. I said, no, they don't have a sense of humor. That's crazy, Dad. That's crazy. They're aliens. No, they're not. They're angelic. They're divine. And sure enough, we heard a cow in our backyard. Now, just so you understand why that's significant, we had a 6-acre yard, and it was 2 houses on one property, a big property, and it was our house that we built by hand. I said when I was 12 years old, and my grandfather, the one who I got off the school bus all those years ago. So we were truly next door neighbors on the same plot of land. So big yard, surrounded by trees and woods, and the only open space where something could have entered the property was the road. Everything behind us was walled in by fences and trees. It was impossible for a creature, unless it was about the size of a small dog, to get into our yard. And I heard a cow beside me. I was spooked. I looked around and I said, maybe it's the Griffin's cows. And Dad said, son, there's not been cows around here for, 15, 20 years. Oh, this is crazy, Dad. This is nothing. Then I heard another cow. And, to speed that part up a little bit, I heard about 5 cows, but they were around me, but there was no body. There were no cows, and they were so loud. And I know this sounds crazy. I know this sounds out there, but it happened, and it changed me. And there were 5 or 4 or 5, maybe 6 cows, to where they would moo at different times. And it was so loud at some point, we couldn't even hear each other speak. And I'm looking around frantic. I have an analytical mind. I'm looking around like there's the neighbor's cows. There's the neighbors behind us cows. It's got to be something. And then when they stopped, Dad looked at me and said, she appeared to me as a bull. Do you get it? And I was like, this is crazy. And we didn't talk about it for, I don't know, another 5 years. We didn't talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I thought it was silly. I knew it happened, but I was in this cognitive dissonant state where there's got to be a reason, right? And over time, it kind of dug deep into my mind to help me understand that these beings, at least the ones that we have seen and interacted with and, been touched by physically and non-physically in a way, I don't think they're sitting up there in a ship, just spinning around, hoping they don't run out of fuel, putting their little zoomer down on me and saying, okay, listen to him, see what he's got to say, then we're going to go mess with him. I learned from that night, even though we didn't talk about that for about 5 years, I learned that they truly were something beyond even what we were told they're not supposed to be, if that makes sense. Because remember, the government was saying, oh, no, aliens aren't real. Oh, right. Great. I knew something was real. Well, the government never says spiritual interdimensional beings at this time. They weren't even talking about that. The whole topic was UFOs, nuts and bolts. So it was very confusing. I came to realize that it's much more than that. It's mystical. It's magical. It's, a destiny sort of thing. I truly believe that. From that night forward, every experience I've ever had has been synchronistic. It's been mind altering. I've got another few that I could share. I mean, I had one experience, and next thing you know, I'm getting married to somebody because of it. I know it sounds crazy. I'll go into it. And I don't think that they're sitting up there and spinning ships because of that night. It changed me. Just hearing the cows in my yard that had no body. They mess with you. They play with you. They laugh. They're these joyful beings who, they don't want to terrify you. They want to guide you. What's a way that would really make Ryan think about this in a way he can't deny? He might have trouble with it at first, but he'll remember it, That night.
Man, I know exactly what you're talking about, because for me, when I kind of got fast-tracked in this entire field regarding my own experiences, it got ridiculous to the point that anything that I wanted to see, I just had to throw it out to the universe. And the next thing you know, boom, there's something happening, whether it's channeling, whether it's seeing Bigfoot, whether it's UFOs, seeing aliens face to face, none of this nighttime sleeping crap that it could be a dream, but literally having that experience, like you just throw it out there and say, well, I'd like to see some fairies hanging out in the trees today. Next thing you know, you see a tree in the middle of the forest lit up like a Christmas tree. And we don't have, lightning bugs around our area. We don't. But I mean, this is the way it happens, correct?
Yeah, and I do want to take just a little tiny step back, and I want to throw this out there. I'm not saying aliens aren't real. I know that a lot of people take that offensively. I just want to clarify that in our experience, it has been other than that. I'm not trying to take away from anybody who says they saw this or they saw that. I don't mean that in any sort of way. But yes, could you kind of paraphrase the question
Well, let's move on here, because I
Okay.
do have another question for you in regards to this.
Sure.
You know, do you recall your first extraterrestrial contact?
I do.
Tell me about it.
I want to, and this is the night that I was about to tell you anyway. So that's a perfect question. I want to clarify that I have never face to face in my conscious state seen a form or a body that was corporeal. Does that make sense? Corporeal,
Yes.
like you could touch it and it was fully visible or opaque. But I have seen things that shimmered, move on the walls, or it approaches you and you can feel it, but you can't see it yet. You can see through it and an outline. So I'm going to go into that. I liked this girl. Well, the moral of the story is I'm marrying this girl, so that I'm going to get to a point here, but I liked this girl really bad. And she was my sister's best friend. And I was really scared. You know, is this the right thing to do, to kind of swoop in and take her away from my sister? This feels wrong, but we're really good friends. So I had my best friend over, and he is also an experiencer. And it's kind of like fate that brought us together. And we're just talking about it, and I'm getting his advice, and we're just hanging out really late and just talking things over, just going over the troubles in our life. We went off to different colleges after high school, so we always caught up and just had these deep chats, right? And everybody that ever hung out and stayed over in high school, any of my friends, they all knew about this experience, and it weirded them out. It freaked them out. Some of them saw things with me, like this guy. Some of them never saw anything, and they would make fun of me for it, and we would never talk about it again. And to this day, we don't. But everyone was scared of our yard at night. There were a lot of jokes to be had there. Oh my God, Bigfoot's going to eat us, all this, all that. So this was one of those nights where we probably stayed up till about 2 a.m. and we were just mulling things over in our head. And we came to the conclusion, you know, it probably wouldn't be that bad of an idea if I at least tell her how I feel. Maybe see, you know, put the ball in her court and see what she has to say about it. And we came to that conclusion. He's like, hey, man, you want to walk me to my car? Yeah, I got you. You know, that kind of thing. He's scared, whatever. It's 2 a.m. I'll walk him to his car. We had a long driveway. Remember, 6-acre property out in the country. So I'm walking him out to his car. And the thing to note is that for whatever weird reason, I never left the door open. It's kind of like this obsessive compulsive, like, got to shut and lock the door, got to shut and lock the door, got to shut and lock the door. I left it cracked. I never, ever do that. Something told me, just leave the door cracked. It's probably 2 a.m. People are asleep. I'll just want to slide right back in. So I walk him all the way out to his car. It's about 100 yards, dirt, gravel road, whatever. And when I get to his car, I see something run by his car. And it was this pure, I want to say the word shadow, but it wasn't black. It was white. White as a star in the night sky. And it ran by his car. And I'm so used to this stuff. At this point, I'm like, 20 years old, whatever. I've been having these experiences many years. I just didn't say anything. I didn't freak out. I wanted my friend to feel comfortable. So I said, have a good night. Walked away, didn't react, right? Start walking back to the house, and the front porch lights flipped off. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mom's locking me out. She didn't know I'm out here. Get back to the door and it's locked. So I ring the doorbell. My mom comes to the door freaking out, and she says, why would you do that? The baby's sleeping, freaking out. Baby's crying now. My brother had a girlfriend at the time who had a baby. So woke the baby up, rang the doorbell. She's mad. I did a sweep through the house because I thought this was weird already at this point. Who locked the door? Was it my brother here? Was it my other brother? Was it my sister? Wasn't the baby? So I came to the conclusion that something had locked me out. So I walked into my room, kind of freaked out at this point. Dad was in Maine. I think at the time he was doing some experience or speak thing. So I texted him, oh my gosh, Dad, something weird just happened, kind of spooky. I go into my room and I flip the light bulb, turn on the light switch. And the light bulb, when I say exploded, it didn't shatter with glass going everywhere, but it became so supercharged that a blue light filled the room, and the filaments on the inside ruptured to where I could unscrew the light bulb and shake them around. It just ruptured on the inside. It was destroyed. And I felt a surge of energy, and I was so freaked out at this point, I stayed up till probably 6 in the morning and didn't go to sleep. So I saw the little thing run across the yard. I was locked out of the house. Lights are flipping off one by one. The light bulb thing, my mom was so terrified she made me check every closet in the house. It was like something was going on to where these little events were lining up for me to have a spooky thing. Fast forward, oh, by the way, end of the story. Next day I asked her out, now we're getting married. So I chalked that up to kind of the Adjustment Bureau, arranging us. So I'm very thankful for that. So I'm hanging out with this guy again, a little bit in the future, probably a year. And same thing, we're just mulling over our problems. And my brother went off to college in a different town. So I would always hang out in his room. It was empty space, right? It was kind of like my game room, whatever. And I'm hanging out in the game room, and I'm sitting one way, and he's sitting another way to where we're kind of facing each other at an angle, where both of our line of sight was in the opposite corner. And we're just talking, and we both just stopped talking. And we saw a little being in the corner of the room. It was the size that my father describes, about 3 or 4 foot. But it was translucent, so to speak. It shimmered. I could see the round eyes. I couldn't see a color, but it shimmered. And we both looked at it. We both stopped. And he was freaked out. And I said, "You saw that too, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." And I felt a physical touch on my chest. And I cannot believe, and I was new to having a cell phone. I can't believe I never thought to do this, but I lifted my shirt and I had a red mark on my ribs. I felt something touch me, but there was nothing there. I had a physical red mark on my body. So we saw this little thing, and next thing you know, boom, I'm physically touched. He was so freaked out. I don't even know what he was thinking that night, but we both saw this thing standing in the corner in my own bedroom. So I went to bed that night with heavy thoughts.
I bet. And when you have those experiences, the hard part about it is, even though they're happening so frequently,
yes,
you can never predict when they're going to happen.
Never.
You may get a feeling. Did you ever have a sign or a feeling that these entities had given you that you were going to have interaction?
That's a good question. I would never say there's been a time where I was given a sign that I would go and see something in the immediate future, but I will tell you this. So with my current fiance, it's kind of a funny story. So back in about 2015, 2016, maybe, the CIA posted, like CIA.gov. At this time, we had friends in the CIA already, like Jim Simivan, all those guys that we already knew them back then. So we kind of kept on top of these people and, hey, go check out this article kind of thing. Oh, sweet. And I looked it up and it said, CIA posts X-Files. Do you remember that? Or do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, cool. So this was that day. And my fiance and I, we read that and we thought, wow, this is a big day. Like, this is really cool. Maybe people won't think we're as crazy anymore. And the whole night just kept getting stalled to where it was like one thing after another. We kept getting delayed where we were going to go. I was going to go hang out with a friend. And next thing you know, I'm babysitting my brother's girlfriend's child at the time. They give me a call. We're an hour late. Oh, man, I get a call from my other friend. Hey, dinner's taking a little longer. We need to push it out another hour. Everything just kept falling into place where things were getting delayed and delayed and delayed that night to where we were like, what's going on? Should we even go? We ended up going, and when we walked out the front door to get in the car and drive, I saw something immediately, and I didn't react. I didn't get scared. I don't get scared when these things happen. I'm just so, I guess, used to it. And I saw an orb, a very bright white. Imagine if you had a light bulb, but it didn't have the glass around it. It was just a light, a white light. And it shot from the sky down to the ground about 10 feet in front of me. I kind of stopped and I said, I just saw something. And she said, oh, it was probably an airplane. I said, no. I just saw something like right in front of me. And she said, oh, well, I don't know what to tell you. So we walked down the stairs and I drop it. I don't want to scare her. She had never had an experience at this point. And then we see another one, and it appeared in front of our face, and it shot across our line of sight about 2 feet, 3 feet away, and it just zipped by, and it had a whole tail and everything. It was definitely like some intelligent force. It was an energy. It was something. I don't know. I don't think it was an alien, perhaps. It was something. And she was so many emotions went through her head. She just hysterically just broke down and just sobbed. So I got her in the car and I stepped on the gas and I got out of there. I thought she was terrified. And she's like, "Why are you driving away? I want to see it again." I'm like, "What the heck's wrong with you? It turns out she wasn't scared. She was so happy after being with me for 2 or 3 years now that she finally had her, I guess you could say, initiation into the family. So I would say it wasn't foresight. It wasn't like I knew it was going to happen, but I've had days where synchronistically it's like one thing after another is leading up to the finale. There's been a few times like that.
I want to ask you about your lovely fiance, Jenny, here, as we have Ryan Bledsoe here on Beyond Humanity here on UAPresearch.com. Ryan, in regards to Jenny, I mean, when she finds out about your family's history, your family's stories, she's friends with your sister. She is falling in love with you, a good looking, guy who is, just as madly in love with her. I mean, this is a big burden.
Right.
And I mean that as a polite term, a big burden for her to take on, because she's literally taking on your baggage. You know what I'm saying? And that's a lot of strength right there in a partner, in a best friend, for someone to say, "I'm with you. I have your back on this." How hard has this been on her in her own transition with her own family, with her own friends, and along those sorts, or coworkers, knowing that she's going to be changing her last name to Bledsoe?
That's a very good question, because we were just talking about that today. It's kind of a funny topic. So I will say, at first, she was younger than me, so she was in a few grades below me with my sister, and she first heard about us because she was a new kid at some point. And the documentary had already happened, so she had heard about the crazy Bledsoes, the alien people. Then she meets my sister. She didn't put two and two together. She's a new kid in town, just moved from Florida. She hears about it. She hangs out with my sister. She gets to our house at some point, and she is like, "Ryan, come in the room. I want you to tell my friend something." And then it clicked, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, these are the people I heard about at lunch, the crazy people." And she thought it was cool. So she calls her mom. Turns out her mom, my mother-in-law in the future, she loves ghost shows. She loves paranormal shows. Call her. Let's get her over here. Next thing you know, it's her mom's at our house, and we're talking about it, and she's, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool, and it's paranormal. Wow." And at first it was a cool reaction, and then the reality kicked in when we started dating, that it was very intense. It was, there were government people coming around. I'm sure you guys know about Tyler and people like that, people that would flash badges when they showed in the door. These people started coming around, and it intimidated her. It frightened her at first. And she eventually came around to it when she started having her own experiences. But it's just kind of funny how at first it was really exciting, and then it was like, "Oh my gosh, I might have to deal with this for the rest of my life. This is really scary." But she never faltered. She never backed off. And she supported me from start to finish, despite the fact that at first she wasn't always comfortable with the things we were saying. It's very intense. I mean, if you've heard an interview from my father, or many people might hear what I say and think, that sounds crazy. Well, imagine showing up at my house for dinner with my parents and you're dating this guy. Like, it's intense. It's very intense. But she took it like a champ, and now she loves it. She's my rock. We talk about it all the time. And just earlier tonight, we were having a conversation with some friends. She said, "It's pretty funny, because when I take on this last name, Bledsoe, and you Google my new name, the things that pop up are football and aliens, because of Drew Bledsoe." So we talk about these things. It's just funny to us. She loves it.
And that's a special relationship to have, is when you have a partner who can walk with you regarding these type of experiences. I want to kind of turn the direction here a little bit, because you brought up something as you were describing, Jenny, about, the government agents coming to your house and coming to meet with you and your dad and the entire family. That has to be a little bit intimidating, considering, we all want to trust our government, but we know our governments have these secret sides to them that can at times not be very pleasant. What was it like for you the first time somebody from the Pentagon or from CIA headquarters reached out to you guys? And why would you invite them in?
That's a very good question as well. So when they did the documentary, it did later come out that the guy who was the director of MUFON at the time was a CIA plant. So getting that aside, technically that was the first time the government showed up. We're going to move past that, and we're going to assume you mean the first time someone knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm with so-and-so. So we're going to start from there. I'm 15 years old, and I'm home from school because it's summer break. You know, so what do? You stay up all night and play games. It's what kids my age did at the time. So I wake up and I get a knock on the door. Dad's out. He's doing something. Mom's, I don't know. She's probably not home at the time. And I go open the door, and there's this really tall guy, and this really intimidating looking guy. And on a shirt he had, it wasn't a badge, but it was a clearance that said NASA, Harold Povenmire. When I opened the door, I just froze. I'm like, hello, how can I help you? He said, hi, my name's Hal Povenmire. I drove 12 hours from Cape Canaveral hoping your dad, Chris Bledsoe, would be home. Is this the right home? I said, let me call my dad real quick. I get him on the phone. You know, hey, Dad, there's a guy from NASA here. Well, what does he want? And I said, well, he just wants to talk to you. And he said, okay, take him in and entertain him. So I brought him in, and he was in our family for 11 years since. But that initial moment, I was actually the first one who answered the door, and it was Hal Povenmire. Many people know about our connection with him, and he came for 11 years. He spent Thanksgivings with us. He spent Christmases with us, birthday parties. He went to my sister's college graduation. He just showered us with these cool relics, Tektite meteorites. I have a 9,000-year-old arrowhead. He was just this kind of guy. He loved us. He wanted to be in with us and have our trust so much that he just treated us like we were family to him. And it was a really pleasant and comfortable experience as far as NASA's concerned. And then, of course, later down the road, Tyler came, who's also with NASA. And then the CIA people came. But in the beginning, it was very comfortable. At some point, some figures started showing up more recently who have not made it so comfortable. I'm not sure if I should say this on air, but I feel like I'm just going to go ahead and say it. There were a couple death threats placed, like my mother and my brother. There were some comments made by some people associated with some people in certain agencies like CIA and DIA, and basically made a comment, you know, you're going to tell us your story a certain way, or we could just put a bullet in the back of their head. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. You know, there's been moments like that too. For example, I really don't know if I should say this one. Tyler made some comments. I'm sure people know who I'm talking about when I say that name. It kind of made some comments to us. He was never, in my memory or anything my father's told me, he was never rude. He was never aggressive. He was very polite. He was a very nice man. But he made some comments that kind of made your hair prick up sometimes. Like when he showed up at our house, he went down the clearances, the NASA, the CIA, the NRO, the Area 51, which, yes, they do have a clearance for. I've seen it. I've touched it. And I'm sure people would like to hear that one. He made some comments like, if you guys were talking about what you're talking about now, just 6 years ago, you would have been shot and killed. But we don't do that anymore. We have different ways of, you know, making sure things don't get out. And we were like, oh my gosh, what do we say to that? And then he said, anyway, I got a PowerPoint to show you. Let's take a look at it. And he switched gears. He never threatened. I never got the vibe he was threatening us. It was more so like, thank God things have changed now to where we don't do this anymore, you know? But definitely the other guy, it was more of a threat. So it's not always been comfortable. In the most part, if we have hung out with or, you know, partied with, like I said, I've been to a bar mitzvah in New York City with people like the director of the CIA and some politicians, other people like that who are interested. It's very pleasant. It's very fun. I've spent Easters, Christmases, holidays with people in these agencies. There's been a small handful that made me feel terrified, very terrified. It's not all been great, but it's been worth it for sure.
Your dad has made comments that he feels very protected by certain members
Yes.
in the alphabet agencies. Does that also fall in lines with what you've experienced as well? Because there are so many people who've tried to bully you guys in the government, trying to, you know, maybe upstage your story, shut you guys up. or whatever it may be, but there's this healthy clique of people within these agencies that have really taken care of the Bledsoe family. Do you feel the same way?
I do. I really do. I feel like in a way we're untouchable. If that, and I don't mean to sound, I don't mean that cocky. I don't mean that in a way that's like because we're so important. I don't mean that. But when Tyler came to our house, I spoke with him face to face. I don't know if people know what level we've interacted with him. Dad and I think the same way about things. We believe in many ways the same way about things, but it's probably gonna be bad for me, but I'm a little bolder and I'll say a few more things because I don't think there's going to be a consequence. My father thinks I'm protecting my family. I'm thinking, well, people want to hear it, Dad. They should know. So I'm gonna say a few things he's probably never said before on this subject. When Tyler came to our house, this was 2013. He told us, "I was sent here to study your family because you had a divine experience with a real entity. This lady, she's revered in these secret circles." This is his words, not mine. "She's revered. She's mystical. She's powerful. We want to know what she wants." And Dad's like, "Well, I know what she wants. At least I know what she told me." So Tyler asked. He didn't force. He never threatened. I don't want to give that. He was a very nice man, so I hope nobody takes it that way. But he asked my father to put it in writing and send it to the Pentagon. It was within days or weeks. It was probably weeks. We got a letter in the mail with a stamp of the seal of Camp David. He went and he took my father's writings and briefed the president, is what you might assume. He briefed somebody close to the president on our experiences. We met with Jim Simivan a few years later, and I don't know if people know the extent of how high up he was in the CIA, but I'll just put it in very brief terms. He was probably what you would consider the equivalent of like a 2-star general in the Army. That's how high up he was in the CIA. Very big fella. And he told us flat out, "You call me if you're scared, if you feel unsafe. I'll have somebody on your doorstep overnight. You just call if you need help." My dad went, I know this story's not public. I definitely would like to talk about it. And please stop me if I'm rambling, But my dad was going to go out to, I guess he was going out to Malibu or Hollywood or something to meet with the people that we have an option agreement with. Are you familiar with that? Okay, cool. He was going out to meet with them, and my dad gets a call from somebody we know in NASA. I'm not going to say his name. I hope that's okay. And this guy says, "Chris, do not fly out to California. There's a group of people out there who want you dead. And if you fly out on this trip, you will never come home." And my dad said, well, I'm going to go, like, what do I do? And this guy said, "Call the feds. Call your friend Jim. Tell him my name. It'll create a red flag in the system," whatever that means. I don't know what it means. This is what he said. "And you'll have a protective detail." So Dad hopped on the phone with Jim Simivan. He said, "Hey, so-and-so called me. He was a little drunk, but this is what he told me." The guy was, and the reason I say the drunk thing is because he probably would have never done that sober, because it's just not what you do. When you're an intelligence, that's why many people in the intelligence community are not allowed to be drunk, because they'll do things like this and they'll slip up secrets. The guy ended up losing his job over this, but thank God he did it, if what he was saying was true. So Dad calls Jim Simivan, says, "So-and-so called me to tell you this." When Dad showed up in Hollywood, he was having lunch with these guys, and his phone starts messing up. It starts like bugging to where he has no reception and he can't touch his screen. And he walks outside, and there's a 40-foot Homeland Security RV, or whatever you would call it, outfitted for like a bust or a raid or something, and people with assault rifles and suits. And they just look at my dad and they don't say a word. So before my dad flew out, Jim said, "Don't worry, Chris, enjoy your trip. I'll make sure that you feel safe." Then the rest of the week, a white van followed him around everywhere he went. So I am very confident that the people who are interested in our story, the Simivans, the Tylers, and others who we've met, want to make sure that we are still around to tell it, or still around to at least be investigated. I'm very confident in that. I don't feel like anybody's going to come mess with us. Someone definitely made a threat, and we never heard from him pretty much again once we called Jim Semivan. So very thankful for that.
Why you guys though? And I'm sure you guys are not the only family who is going with this, but maybe the most public. Okay. Why you guys has NASA reached out? Why Jim Semivan? Why the CIA protection? Why have university professors reached out to the entire family that are on the unknown, but they want to be a part of some sort of study with you guys? Do you feel like guinea pigs?
No, we don't feel like guinea pigs. We feel more so like we feel like very thankful that there are actually people taking us seriously. But to answer your question, I don't personally know why, but I'm going to tell you what they say. Is that okay? This could be true, this could be false, but it's what they say. Hal Povenmire told us in the 11 years that he was coming to our home, he flat out told us, NASA wants to know if you would be the family. And Dad is like, what do you mean? And Hal said, well, there's other families out there like you. It's right. I mean, we can't be the only ones. I fully believe that. I've met people. You've had experiences. We know that. We don't think we're, important more than anybody else. It's just we can't help that people are so interested in us. So we go with it. And Hal said, NASA wants to know, there's 3 families. We've been investigating you he said, I've been sent by NASA to investigate you and 2 other families. I've been making my rounds. And after all my years of coming here to prove that you were, lying, I ended up finding so much evidence that I had to tell NASA that you guys are it. So would you be comfortable being the family that if this ever came out someday that NASA would sort of use your face? And Dad was like, well, certainly. That sounds great to me. I just want people to know I'm not lying to them. So that's what the NASA angle was if we were comfortable being a family that would ever go public with our story, should NASA ever say, hey, this stuff's real. Look at this family. We've been investigating them for all these years. Hal ended up dying, unfortunately, last Thanksgiving. God bless him. He was a wonderful friend of ours. Miss him dearly. We don't know what ever became of that. He never was able to report to us ever again. He died suddenly, unfortunately. So Jim Semivan was hanging out at our house one night, and I asked him the same question. I'm always asking these people, why do you come see us? I'm a very curious guy. I ask a lot of questions. And I said, Jim, when did you hear about my dad's story? So just quick frame of reference. I met him in 2016. Story happened, 2007? So that's 9 years. So I put him on the spot. I said, when did you hear about my dad? And he kind of grinned really big, like, oh gosh, I didn't think he'd ever ask this. He said, the moment he typed it and hit send to MUFON. And they've been on that case ever since. And he said, honestly, your father's case is the most studied, discussed, investigated case in intelligence communities and labs somewhere, research facilities, whatever. It's the most studied case in modern history. And I was not allowed to meet you because I was active CIA at the time, and that's against protocol. You don't show up doing ops on an innocent civilian's home. But now that I'm retired, I was able to be introduced to you. And the funny thing about that is when we met him, he acted like he didn't know us or he'd never heard of us. It was like, oh, hey, I'm a friend of a friend. But he wanted to meet us. He had a plan. So I caught him off guard, and he ended up telling me he's known about us for 9 years, and he's been waiting for the right time to meet us. The other one, there was one more. I might have to think about it. Oh, Tyler. Yeah, I already kind of touched on that earlier, but he told us. He said, I was sent to study your family because we know that the lady's real. I have to understand the spiritual aspect of it, and I, basically was tasked to meet you to learn about it because my boss wants me to know more about this. Who's your boss? He said his name's the Hammer. And the Hammer works for God, and that's all I'll say. All these years, I never figured out what that meant, but it's what he said. And these people are telling us in private that they're studying us because they know we're telling the truth, they know it's real, and they know whatever the lady has to say, it's important for some reason. And that's all that's it. I mean, I can't really tell you much more on that, unfortunately.
We are with Ryan Bledsoe here on Beyond Humanity at uapresearch.com. Ryan, there are a lot of people out there who have heard about the lady. You are someone who has had experiences and know all too much about this situation. This is some entity or person that the United States government has issue with and wants to learn about. This is something that your dad has been very profoundly vocal about. Who or what is the lady?
It's a very good question. I'll tell you what I believe she is. And I guess this is safe to say because Dad has kind of recently hinted at this in some interview recently. So hopefully he won't be too upset with me here. But I personally believe that she is, yes, an entity. She's very real. It's not some. A lot of people say, well, you know, when you have experiences, it's some hologram that someone's tricking you with, or what. I don't buy that. I believe that she is a divine entity. Now, when I say divine, that can mean a number of things, and a lot of people get into the semantics and take things technically and literally. I'm not being technical or literal. I'm being very, just a deep thought here. But I think she's divine in the sense that she is non-material. She is non-physical. She is energy, or you could say she is spiritual. She's magical, mystical, whatever. I believe she is a being that exists entirely in a separate place, made of no matter, energy. One could say spirit. One could say that. It doesn't matter. Semantics. It's something different that we can't perceive, we don't understand. I believe that she and maybe her particular race of beings or wherever she came from are here to guide us to take steps towards being that way in the future. It's funny because I was just hanging out with a friend yesterday and we were talking about the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. And at a quick glance, that doesn't sound relevant, but what's the point of the film? They get these monoliths, fast forward to the end, cosmic baby. What's the point? They started off as cavemen, and the next thing you know, there's this clear evolution through all time until they become these beings that transcend not just physical material life, but then interstellar travel and then into energy, cosmic, whatever. And I think that's what the lady's here to do, truly. I think she's here to guide us to become like her. This is what she told my father. She said that someday, when you die and even after that, you'll be as we are. You'll go wherever you want to go. Your spirit, when you die, it goes into these orbs, and then it exists in the eternal place, or the heavenly realm. Some people might call it if they read the Bible. I think she's from that place. I think it's very real. I think there is a creator. Maybe it's not as simple to understand as what we've been told that it is every 2,000 or for 2,000 years now. I think she is a part of that group that is responsible for the creation of everything, life, matter, maybe. I think that she is the missing part of that Trinity, whereas it's usually known as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Well, what she told my father is that it's the Father, the Son, and the Mother. And that can be metaphorical, meaning, you have creation that comes out of two opposing forces meeting and giving life, or you could take it as there are literally entities that serve certain purposes in our creation, like, the lady who is this lovely being who comes here to guide us and through this evolution and everything. I think it's metaphorical and I think it's literal. I think these beings interact with us in symbols. She appeared as a bull, like Hathor in Egypt. That's never been said from my father before, but I thought that would be interesting. She appeared as a bull, and she had a crown on her head, and she said, "I'm the mother. I am the missing part." And I was there since all of universal creation of all life, since the beginning and before all time. And that's just, in no simpler terms, it's what my dad heard from her, and that's truly what I believe she is. I believe she's either lying or she's telling the truth, but I know she's real. I don't think Dad's lying. So, I buy it. Shiny lady comes down in a white dress. She's beautiful. She tells me something. I tend to listen. If you put it simply.
Personal interaction with her?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Have you had personal interaction with her?
I have not, but Dad's not the only one. That's a really cool story. So let me put it like this. So Dad was with Tyler. He was with him. He was doing, this is not really well known, but it is known. I'm just going to really gloss over this here. But Dad got involved with some cutting edge stem cell type research with Tyler about, how to process and download data through alternative methods because of Dad's contacts with the phenomenon. It ended up making breakthrough research, several $1 million patents. Obviously, we weren't paid for it, but it's not the point. The point is it was just to help people. And he was there at one of these meetings, this little girl being healed of bone cancer, and the people he was with, the Tylers and all those guys, they were kind of always testing my dad, like looking for signs and stuff. My dad gets a phone call from my cousin who was staying. So when my grandfather passed around this time, so I have an older cousin who moved in with my grandmother to take care of her. So she became our next door neighbor, if that makes sense. And she called my dad freaking out saying, "Oh my God, Uncle Chris, there's a lady in your yard." My dad has this to this day. He has this on voicemail. And she said, just freaking out. I've heard the voicemail dozens of times. She said, "Oh my God, there's a floating lady. Me and Anna, her daughter, me and Anna just saw her and she was floating off the ground and then she zipped off and disappeared." And they were just freaked out. So to my knowledge, there's been two people, including, or three, and Stephanie, my cousin, her daughter, and then my father. So unfortunately, I have not.
Knows about her.
I'm sorry, what now?
The government knows about her.
Yes, that's what they told us. When Tyler came over, he had a mission patch in his hand, and it was, I've posted it a few times. If anybody out there ever, goes on my Twitter, I've posted it. It's this lady with purple hair. This is an official NRO mission patch, and she's mystical. She kind of looks like a Greek goddess, but with purple hair. She has a trident and a fireball. And he hands us this patch. He had the physical patch. And he said, "We honor her. We revere her. We know that she's there. We just want to know what she wants." And he kind of indicated to us there is a sort of an Illuminati type group. I hope that's okay to say here, but there's an Illuminati type group within the inner circles of NASA and groups above NASA, which there are groups above NASA that kind of revere this lady and are really dying to know what she wants. And then a lot of that has gone into, and Dr. Pasolka's American Cosmic, a lot, and a little bit of that is talked about, if that makes sense at all. And then on the other hand, Jim Semivan, also very high up in the CIA, but we've never been with them together. They're different experiences, different people. They know of each other, but we've never been with them together. So Jim told us, we know the lady's real. She's been showing up for thousands of years. She showed up at Fatima. She showed up. I can't remember the other stories, to be honest. And he said, "We know she's coming. We know she's powerful. We just want to know what she wants. That's why we want to talk to you, is what is she telling you?" And Dad says, "Well, she tells me she's this. She tells me she's that." Whatever I said earlier. And they listen and they just keep asking, and they like when we update them, but they know of her. To my understanding, physically face-to-face talking with these figures like Jim Semivan and Tyler and some others who've asked about her, my current understanding of this from dealing with these people since I was 13 and so on, they don't like talk to her, the lady, if that makes sense. They don't talk to her. They're not in cahoots. From what I understand, the government is not in cahoots with the lady and these beings that we have experienced. And that's why they come. That's why they come to see us, because they want to know what they want. And to be honest with you, I don't think this has ever been said on air by my father ever. When MUFON came to do the documentary, they had some documents in a manila envelope, and they pulled them out. And they were diagrams for the 1950s. They weren't diagrams. They were hand-drawn pictures with markings on them. And when you held them next to my father's drawings, they were identical. Identical. It was like if I draw a stickman, you draw a stickman, they look exactly the same. Well, we just drew the same thing. It's not. You can't mistake it. And it was of the beings in the ship, and then from 1952, the beings in the ship, down to the shutter blinking eyes, the shape of the craft, every single detail was identical. And then the James Carrion himself said, Mr. Bledsoe, this is why we know you're telling the truth. Because in 1952, these beings came, and they, remember, this guy was CIA too. We didn't know it at the time, but he was. He said, these beings came, and they warned us never to use nukes again because it harms beings in other realities. The energy from a nuclear blast, whatever it does, it has these lasting effects in realms that we don't perceive. So these guys came to us and said, stop it. And that was it. So they knew my dad was telling the truth from the jump, from MUFON all the way up to the Semivans and the Tylers and all these people. But what I understand is they don't chat with these beings on a friendly basis. I really don't think they are. I don't think that they are, just getting downloads. And I think when they get their technology breakthroughs, that it's something else. Maybe it's for some divine purpose. Maybe we're all playing a game and it's good versus evil, and the governments could be the good guys, could be the bad guys. I don't know. But I don't think that they're interacting with these beings. I know I keep saying it because I'm trying to process it, but that's why they come. They wouldn't need us if they were,
Ryan, there's a lot of people out there who will say that your family's trust in these alphabet agencies seems a little bit maligned, considering that over time, especially a lot of people in the UFO community have been threatened, have been chased, have been defamed by members of these alphabet agencies. And yet with your family, it's been the polar opposite. Why do you think there's such a difference between what you've experienced comparatively what other people have? And I'll add a second question to that. Do you believe then that you as a family have been given the truth by these officials, that they're there for your benefit?
That's a very good question. So for the folks that have been, I know that stuff has happened my whole life. I grew up watching, the Will Smith Men in Black. It's a very popular concept. It's almost like an archetype in media where there's this kooky but truthful dude who had an experience, and then the government comes in and shuts it down, and it's like, oh, how are they gonna make it out alive? Like, it's just an archetype at this point. And I feel very sorry for those people because I know for a fact that it happens. I don't know why it never happened to us. We have had some folks give us death threats, but we pushed on and we kept telling our story. I would say the reason I think this is a very good question is because I don't know if anyone has dared to ask Dad, and if they have, I haven't heard it. So I'm just going to tell you, I don't believe that all of these people are telling the truth, these government people. I have sat in the room with friends of mine in three-letter agencies. I love them to death. I feel like they're my personal friend, but I feel like they have an agenda. But think from our perspective. There's 6 of us in this home. These folks are knocking on our door, showing us badges, and they're saying, like what Tyler had said, man, if you were saying this stuff publicly 6 years ago, you would have been shot dead. But we don't really do that anymore. So what would you do, Mr. Dave? Would you say, oh my gosh, come in, let me make sure that I, make you comfortable and explain myself? Or would you want to go against that at the time, on the spot? If someone says this to you, you would be afraid. You'd be scared, and you would want to gain these people's trust and be friends with them. And you definitely wouldn't want to be their enemy. They might shoot you and kill you. You don't know. But over time, these people have been nice to us. I do not believe they tell us the truth. Is it okay if I tell you a story about that?
If you feel comfortable telling anything here, this is your story. This has nothing to do with us.
I just ramble a lot, so please stop me.
No, please fill us in.
Okay. Okay.
I think the people here who are listening and probably hearing your story for the first time want to know what it's like to be in your shoes. So whatever you're feeling comfortable with in explaining to the people who will watch this, I think that's important.
Let me put this out there on the air, and I love my father, and I have the highest respect for him. There's some things he will never say because he is a father with his wife and his four, even though we're all adults now and we're self-sufficient, his four children who he thinks he has to protect. There are things he will never say because in his mind he believes will be killed, will be, hurt or whatever. We'll go to jail. He's had comments like that before. He's had terrors of going to jail over this experience, nightmares, things he'll never say on air, but but there's things that I'll say because I watched from the sidelines. For example, most of these people, except Tyler, and I guess I could say, Hal Povenmire and other folks like Diana Pasulka, Dr. Diana Pasulka. Other than those guys and a few others who, if I missed them, I'm sorry if you're listening. Most of these three-letter agency people tell us there's no God, there's no angels. What you're saying, Chris, yes, you're seeing these beings, but they're tricking you. That's not really what's going on. We've never observed that there's God or spirits in the universe. I don't know that it's real, what they're saying. I think that they're trickster spirits, and you need to be careful, and you need to not go near them. And, let us know if they hurt you. Let us know if they say this. Let us know if they say that. But we love you, Chris. We got your back. If you're scared, give us a call. They don't just sit here and pretend to believe the interpretation of everything we experience. They don't. They know we're telling the truth about what we're seeing. They believe that. They don't feed into what we say it is, even though they're not there, they're not experiencing it. They believe we are. They don't feed that. Does that make sense? They have an agenda, and their agenda, the government people, the three-letter agencies, whatever, they have an agenda. I'm just going to say it. It's going to upset a lot of people. There's an agenda. There's a real agenda. The lady told my father, and the agenda is the Great Deception. And the Great Deception is there is no God. There's no spirit. There's nothing that is non-material, and that there will be scary aliens. It's all going to be aliens. And Dad probably will have a talk with me about this one. And these government people are in line with that thought. No, they're not God. They're not. This isn't some deity. She's just like this apparition. She's whatever. She's a race of alien from Klingon B or whatever planet. So for the people who think that we are just worshiping these intelligence people, it's not that. It makes us feel comfortable knowing that we have a line to call, and this agency, if somebody from this agency is calling and making us feel spooked. It also makes us feel a little bit vindicated that someone with such high clearance and credentials just gives us the basic human decency and respect to say, I believe that you saw these things. I want to learn more about it. Oh, by the way, I'm an officer in the CIA, and I ran the clandestine program for the Northern Hemisphere. Please tell me what you saw, Chris. I would love to hear it. It just makes us feel like, wow, if this guy from this position wants to hear what I have to say, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not hallucinating. Maybe I'm not a kook. But my neighbor and even my grandpa, when I was a little boy, said, your dad's smoking dope. And I love my grandpa. I'm not disrespecting my grandpa. But do you see what I'm saying? So that's why we're so in with these people. It's like you keep a line. They're not our enemies, but they're certainly our friends. But, I don't think they're just telling us the truth. I don't buy everything they say. What I buy is when they come and say, we believe you're telling the truth. Tell us what it said. Write it down. We're going to take it to the Pentagon. And then they go report it. And then they come back and they're like, tell us more. They listen. They investigate. They tell us things. And this is the story I wanted to tell you. So my dad hung out with the late William Tompkins. Are you familiar with him?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. So, the whole Antarctica stuff with the secret space program and Admiral Byrd and all that good stuff. Well, William Tompkins was one of and this is real, he really was a naval officer. He was a naval intelligence officer during World War II, and he claims, now his creds are real, but he claims he developed the secret space program. Whether that's real or not, I don't know. I don't care. I've never been to space, so I'll probably never go there. Don't care. I care about the orbs that are knocking on my door and in my bedroom. You know what I mean? So no disrespect to anybody that cares about that. I don't care about it. Whatever. Mr. Tompkins told my dad was hanging out with Mr. Tompkins and Tom DeLonge, the TTSA figurehead, who at the time TTSA was not really a thing. It was forming. And I don't know if Dad's ever said this, but they were trying to get him to be one of the core members. And he very respectfully declined. He just felt like my story is my story and I'm never going to change it. I have to stay true to it. You know, hanging out with Mr. Tompkins, hanging out with Tom DeLonge. And Tom DeLonge is like, you know, Chris, let me take you to Bill. Let's see what he has to say about what you're experiencing. It's always like that. It's always like, well, let me take you to this guy so he can tell you what you're experiencing. It's like, no, why don't you just listen to me? I just told you what I saw. Just listen to me. That's always the frustration. And Mr. Tompkins tells my dad, wow, these orb pictures, they're cool. They're awesome. But you know what it is, right? It's technology. It's these reptilians. They conquered the galaxy. I fought them in deep space cruisers. Maybe I didn't pilot them. He built them, is what he said. He built the deep space cruisers. Bill Clinton is a 9-foot reptilian who eats little kids. That's what he said. I'm not trying to make an opinion, but it's just what he said. And they are these small group of people who shapeshift in caves underground. Queen Elizabeth is a 9-foot albino reptilian, and they eat kids. And, you know, there's no real spiritual significance to anything. It's not true. They use time travel to go back in the past and create religions and turn us into a flock of sheep who just, you know, we always have to worship somebody. So they faked our religions. He's just telling us all this stuff. Fundamentally, it's like not what we experienced. My dad's like, just sitting there listening. And by the way, when you die, when you see that white light, they're actually zapping your mind to reincarnate you. All this stuff. And my dad walked away and he's like, yeah, that was weird. So
no kidding.
Yeah, they come at us from all fronts and they try to tell us like what we experienced, what we saw, but they always want to hear us flesh out the details.
That brings up a good point, though. I mean, with all of these different analogies that people are giving you on what you're experiencing, and they're telling you guys what you're experiencing and how it breaks down, you guys must feel like you're in the middle of a tug of war between good and evil, between the good and bad of the government. And in the meantime, you have UFO researchers pulling you from a completely different angle trying to get that information. How have you guys been able to figure out as a family unit what's real and what's just malarkey?
Okay, before I answer that question, I do want to just say I meant no disrespect towards the late Bill Tompkins. I just was telling a story. I hope nobody takes it that way. So to come back to your question, you know, when shiny orbs show up in your face, or, you know, 9-foot glowing beings like Dad saw one of those last year, or the lady, you tend to listen and hear what they have to say and kind of, you know, go with it a little bit. And then you tend to really pay attention when you meet people in these agencies and they say, yeah, no, I believe you're telling the truth, but that being that came down that healed you of your sickness, they weren't telling you the truth, right? So it's kind of made us suspicious of anyone who comes into our life and then immediately says, I believe you're telling the truth, but they're not. They're tricking you. The second I hear trickster spirit, I'm like, start over. I don't buy that. I'm not going to entertain it. I truly don't buy that. And everybody tries to say that. They throw it at us. And that kind of makes me think, like, don't you think we've thought about that through the agonizing times where we lay in our bed sleeping at night after facing these things in person and contemplating the message that they've given, and then the ostracization or whatever, being ostracized from our family members and friends? Don't you think we considered that? We believe them by this point. You're not going to change it. So, and then the other part of your question, the good and the evil. I really hope I don't get in trouble for this one. There are factions in the intelligence communities, and I am aware of at least two. And there's some names I'm going to be really careful not to say. Some folks have been very nice to us. Like, for example, Tyler, he was a very nice guy. He's very high up there, very mysterious figure, but very nice and never made us feel afraid. Then there are those other people, like I said about an hour ago, who gave the death threats. And I was on the phone with one of these figures. Now, when you talk to Tyler, it's all, I believe you 100%, Chris. You know, there's the secret group at NASA who has these, what's the word? Diana talked about it at one point. Ritual is probably not the right word, but it's like they observe certain time, like solstice and equinox, in honor of the spiritual energies. There's people like that in these groups. And then there's the other side, and they're like, well, back to the first side, like the Tyler people, like, yeah, I believe it. Let's go see the Pope. Maybe Jesus was an alien or whatever, whatever you believe, it doesn't matter. They're exploring it, the spiritual side. And then you go back to the other side, and I talk with a dude on the phone, the guy who made the death threat on my mom and my brother. And he says to me, he said, Satan and God are one being. And I said, no, they're not. That's crazy. He said, yeah, they are. They're one being. And they make things happen to shape us, to change us. And it's tough love, like 9/11 and the Vegas massacre. This guy told me this. And then he said, are you familiar with the NWO? And I'm like, kind of blowing it off because I'm like, what do I say at this point? And then he said, me and so-and-so, one of his other CIA guys, we're staunch Bilderbergers and NWO people. And I'm like, oh my God, Dad, like, what do I say to this guy? And he's telling me Satan and God are one, blah, blah, blah. He ended up inviting my dad to this thing called Bohemian Grove. And when I looked into that, I was like, Dad, you're not to talk to this guy anymore. This is weird. And then he shows up and he makes a death threat on my mom and my brother. So to kind of reiterate your question, there's been some people who are very nice. And then there's some people that are so weird that I don't want to even utter their name. I know they're probably listening. Very weird, very uncomfortable scenarios. And this particular group of people targeted and harassed Dr. Pasolka viciously, cowardly and viciously. They terrified her. I feel so sorry for her over this. Bad people, bad actors, very much real connected to intelligence and powerful people. And they're not very nice. And as far as I know, they worship Satan. So definitely a good and a bad side if you catch my drift there. And then there's the Tyler side who takes a picture of my dad to the Vatican and asks the Pope to pray for my dad's sickness. So there's definitely two sides, and we're definitely in the middle of it. And it's not always comfortable. Sometimes it's very weird.
Yeah, and we see that, like we've heard over time, like through my show, Spaced Out Radio, where we've heard a number of researchers say that there is a real battle between factions within the government, that there are those who believe we need to disclose because the extraterrestrials are wanting us to disclose, or that humanity can handle this. Then you have the entire other faction, like you just said, is very satanic, very demonic, controlling of a narrative that is out, that they're out to get people and to ruin what we have on this planet. Now, the way I look at it is, you guys are in this tug of war. You guys are, unwilling participants in all of this. So when you are looking back at everything that has gone on, from the first contact, from the ETs to the lady, to the CIA, to the death threats and everything, how do you walk with your head held high, knowing that you have been able to battle all of this as a family, and to this day you're still being tugged in so many directions? I mean, you guys must have arms like silly putty.
It's not always easy. It's not always, there's some days where I've had, like, for example, Dr. Pasolka, we live in the same town. So there's been some times where, we've met, and I went to the university. My fiance went to her university as a student. She was never Diana's student, but she went to that university. I live 2 minutes from the university. So there's been some times where I've gone and met with her or whatever. And there was one time I was in her office and she kind of whispers, she's like, give me your phone. And she took my phone and she put it in the other room before we would even begin our conversation. So there's some times where we're really paranoid. I mean, my dad was told by Hal Povenmire from NASA, he said, you're going to be bugged for the rest of your life. You're always going to be bugged. Be careful who you let in your home. Tyler told my father, this is going to sound crazy, but it's what he said, whatever. He said, there's a team of people always remote viewing you. Okay, cool. So now we can put our phone in the other room, but we're still being watched, maybe, if that's the truth. All right, cool. Jim Simivan, it might have been him or it was somebody else, but one of these guys definitely said it. It could have been Tyler, could have been Jim. It's been a few years. He told my dad that at any given time there's a spy satellite trained over your home. Great. Now they're monitoring our data when we're walking around the yard, so we're being possibly psychically spied on. Our phones tapped, according to NASA. Spy satellite over our home. So it's not always easy, Dave. Sometimes we really don't walk with our head high. And if you've ever seen how Dad, you interviewed him yourself, you know there's things that Dad won't say because in reality he's terrified of the consequences. But
as any patriarch would be.
Right, as any patriarch would be. But see, me, I believe that something should be said because it's important, and I encourage Dad to say things, but after all, he's my dad, so I don't push him. So yeah, it's not always easy. Sometimes we're very paranoid. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, is someone going to kill me? Is someone going to throw me in prison? Dad has nightmares. He's in prison because of this all the time. So not always easy.
I want to ask you, and this is a little bit off into another region here.
Okay.
But the UFO community, the researchers, the fans, the UFO Twitter, the people who consume this topic on an everyday basis,
Sure.
You've seen the good, you've seen the absolute ugly. I don't think there has been a bad or an in between for you guys.
Right.
Why do you think the reputation of the Bledsoe family has been absolutely shredded apart on social media, from your fans wanting to know more to the biggest critics who don't believe a word you're saying and believe that your family is doing this strictly for popularity and for money?
There's a few ways I want to go into that. If we were doing it for popularity, don't you think we would be on there every day? And I'm not asking you, it's just a rhetorical question. I hope you don't take that the wrong way. But don't people think that we would be on there every day, tweeting every day, every hour, like it was some, my fiance's in marketing. Like if I wanted followers and stuff, that would be, I'd be on it. That's not what it's about. If my dad was in it for money, he wouldn't be living in, ask Bob McGuire. Bob McGuire. We just spoke about that. Ask Bob McGuire. But since other people aren't here and don't know him, I'll just say it. My cat's on the table, sorry. Get down. If my dad was in this for money, he wouldn't live the way he did in a very modest, tiny property in the woods. It's not about money. He's never received money. This option agreement with Hollywood that everyone knows about and is kind of curious about, it's exactly that, an option agreement. We've not been paid. We signed a contract. We created a little LLC or whatever. There's no money in it. It's just legally you have to do that. Saying, be quiet. Don't talk about your story because it's spoilers if we make a project about you. It's not like we're waiting to be paid. It's like we're thinking, okay, these people, they're very nice. They want to tell our story. We just believed them. It's not like we're seeking money. We haven't received money. And as for the fame, there's always a little bit of that with everything you do. There's people that get famous on the internet for really dumb things like stupid little videos or like TikTok or whatever. I would say to those people that the nice people are more in number, but they're silent, if that makes sense. So the couple, if I make a post and 10 people are trying to tear it apart, I guarantee you that there's 50 or 60 people who viewed it and thought in their mind, wow, that's really cool, and moved on. The negative people who are miserable inside and they don't know me and they say like hateful things or whatever, and then I fire back and sometimes they're caught off guard, like, oh my gosh, I didn't think he'd say anything. They have no empathy, I think, to think maybe this person could be telling the truth. And then the other side of that coin, just, I'm not going to say for negative, hateful people, but just for genuine, true blue skeptics. And that's okay. It's okay to be skeptical. I'm a skeptical person. Those kinds of people, I would just say maybe they criticize us because it goes against what is a part of their worldview, which the agenda, which we talked about earlier, is physical, material. There's no God, there's no spirit. So I don't blame them. Tyler told me, he told my dad, and then my dad told me, he said, Chris, there are people who will never believe you because their brain is so programmed by propaganda that a being could land in front of them and walk up to them and speak to them, and they would say it wasn't real. It's programming from birth. You're programmed to be enamored by science fiction, by, oh, I'm in a spaceship, I'm flying, and I've got a lightsaber and all this and all that. But you're not really enamored with spirit. You're not enamored with deep metaphysical concepts because that's not the agenda. That's not what's being pushed on your mind. So when you're this age, it's a hard, concrete thought form in your mind that stuff's not real. It's not what I see all the time. It's not what I'm thinking about and watching and enjoying and pondering. And that's by design, is my opinion. It's by design.
Ryan, we only got a few more minutes here with you tonight on Beyond Humanity. Ryan Bledsoe, our guest. If you, and as you have already throughout this entire process of interview that we've been doing, have been talking very candidly, if there was something that we haven't mentioned tonight that you want the UFO community to know about you or about your family that maybe hasn't been spoken of publicly or very few times, what would that be? What would your message be to other experiencers as well?
I never thought about that. Wow. I guess I would say that, okay, that's a good question. That's a really good question. So there's a lot of people out there that say we're like a Bible thumping alien cult. And that is ridiculous to me. And I would say that I couldn't be farther from the truth. We're not Bible thumping people. So let me just, when I say the word God, 60 or more % of America thinks Bible. That's what you're saying. Well, it's not. God is a title. God is a force. The Greeks believed in a God. The Christians believed in a God. When I say God, when my father says God, people think he means the Christian God, whatever. Well, they truly don't know what he means. And I would just say that we're not pushing the Bible as much as people think we are. We grew up that way. We refer to it because, with reverence, because it's just a thing in the South. But I would just say to the world that think before you assume something that has not been spoken on yet publicly. And there's a reason, because Dad is not uncomfortable with going there. But there are some things that the lady has said that he it has changed his beliefs in a way to where he's not so, I guess, as strict in one system as people say. My dad kind of gets the unfair treatment that, like, oh, he's just some Bible thumping cult guy who saw aliens. Well, that's such an amalgamation of the few different experiences that he's had in those areas that it just makes me sad as his son. And if we were a cult, I haven't got any money from charging admission yet, so just have to say that one. But I've been seeing that a lot lately, and it makes me scratch my head. I don't get it. Just because we say, oh yeah, I believe in God, I saw a being, and it said that there is a God. Well, I would challenge anybody to scroll through my feed. I don't really listen to every one of Dad's interviews because we talk about them on his son, but I would challenge anybody to see if my father has ever said that you have to believe in Jesus, you have to believe in Mother Mary, you have to do this. That's a misrepresentation of what he's saying. And I just feel like there's more to what he has to say, and that maybe someday he'll say it.
If you had a message to other families that are going through similar experiences that your family has gone through, and I realize every experience is different, but there are experiencers out there who are learning about this for the first time, maybe even tonight.
Sure.
What would your advice be to them about going public with their story, with their experiences? Would you recommend it? Would you say, look, you know what, as somebody who's gone through this and seen my family ripped to shreds in public, I wouldn't recommend it? What would your advice be?
My advice would be don't. It's it's a hard path to walk. It can destroy your relationships with your family and your friends, and people will say you're crazy. And like we discussed earlier, you had just recently asked me a question. People have been mistreated and silenced and abused, and honestly, I would say that this is not a world that is ready yet to look someone in the eye and say, I believe that you're telling me the truth. But I would say, if you were going to go public, don't go to a government organization like MUFON who's out to ruin you because they have an agenda. I would say go speak to somebody who, maybe like you, or message somebody who would give them respect, and maybe interview them or talk to them privately and treat them with decency and hear them out, because it's not an easy world to do this. My family was almost like lightning in a bottle, that all these government people started showing up. And I hate to say it, but that's probably never happened to anyone else, where they get this agency show up and this agency show up and this agency show up. That's just not, it's not easy. It's very hard. It's very difficult. And it takes, I would say, resolve, despite everyone tearing you down, to stay true to who you are, what you experienced, and look them in the face and say, I don't care what you say, I know what I saw. So good luck. I'm not saying you should never do it, but I just would say maybe you'd live an easier life if you just walked away from it. It's very daunting.
Ryan, I want to say a big thank you for coming on Beyond Humanity, sharing your story with us, because, we've heard your dad, we've seen you on Twitter, but what you stated here tonight just can't not be completed in 240 characters. Let me tell you that. And I got to tell you, it was an absolute pleasure getting to know you for the first time, talk to you for the first time, and really go into this cold and unknowing, and coming out very educated with what you were saying. You're a brave young man. Your entire family, in my opinion, is very brave for what you're doing. And I think you guys need to be commended for putting your own lives on the line for other people to not only live about, but to learn about as well. I mean, not everybody has the fortitude to do that, but you guys do. So you need to be commended.
I appreciate that. I thank you for the opportunity. It's been a blast. This is my first ever interview. So thank you for making me feel comfortable. I hope I did okay. And, I'm down to do it again someday if you would like that.
Absolutely. Ryan Bledsoe from the famous Bledsoe family in ufology. We want to thank all of you tuning on in to Beyond Humanity, which you can find us at uapresearch.com and on Twitter at UAP Research, as well as for me, you can find us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and our website, spacedoutradio.com.